Volume 1, Chapter 1. Parturition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Where? When I opened my eyes, it was darkness that greeted me first, followed by a stabbing pain in my gut. It was hunger, I realized. A hunger so great its pull was like that of lust. Gigi. I'm hungry, I tried to say. But what came out instead was a cramped, blurred shriek. I closed my eyes to run from that hunger, but it wouldn't leave. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't want to open my eyes. It was too much effort. Gugururu. But then I heard something. Some kind of noise, from somewhere nearby. Gi. That noise gradually drew nearer until it stopped before me. Then I felt something hit me. Something soft and tender with a disgusting smell. Meat. It was meat. Delirious from the hunger, I didn't ask what kind of meat it was. Greedily, I put the meat into my mouth and sunk my teeth into it. Delicious. Ha 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 ha. It's delicious. I don't know what kind of meat this is, but it's delicious. More than anything I've ever tasted. Gigi, Gigigi. Before I knew it, I'd eaten everything. More. I want more. It's not enough. I want more. 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 The craving within me, unsatisfied, grew fiercer within as it lusted for more. Then all of a sudden, something grabbed at me. It took me from the back of my neck, and lifted me up. Gi. If I could look up now, then I would know that it was some creature's giant hand holding me up. Not long after, I felt the wind caress me, and light filled my sight like fire, scorching my eyes in its brightness. I had to close my eyes, it was simply too bright. If I let them get used to it first, I should be able to open them though. And then, Gigi. When I could finally open my eyes, what greeted me was a great, thick forest, followed by the realization that my field of vision was shaking. I wonder how long it's been since I last carried something like this. 20 years. No, even as a baby, I would have carried things in a more normal way. I mean, humans from the start are. As I wondered who it was that was treating me so roughly, I turned my head. But what I saw shook me to the core. What had been dangling me around like a club was something that I could not have thought to be anything but a joke. A creature with a wide, green frame. Gi. No. No matter how you look at this. This isn't human. In other words, it's that. Maybe it's because of my lack of vocabulary, but I can't think of a word more fitting than goblin. Yes, a goblin. That hideous face. That bulky, wide, frame with green skin. Yes. A goblin. It must be a goblin. As I was muttering that to myself, that goblin turned and looked at me with a face I could only describe as repugnant. I'm going to die, I thought with a gulp. That green, bulky monster was so horrifying, its gaze, alone, could make ma brace for death. However, to my relief, it only glanced at me, before walking again. It continued to walk until eventually, we left that thick forest. After which, it threw me to the shore of a beautiful lake, a rare sight nowadays. L.RG, food. Catch. No good, then die. After the goblin told me that, it turned its back on me and walked away. Seeing that green monster turn, I noticed that it had a lethal weapon that looked somewhat like a one-handed club on its back. Food. Is it talking about the meat from a while ago? But exactly what kind of meat was that? In any case, I'm not in any mood to go against a monster. So for the meantime, I better refresh myself with some water from the lake. By the way, this is safe to drink, right? As I quenched my thirst, I noticed that I was able to distract myself from the hunger. Now, what should I do? Should I try to run? But my biggest problem is that I have no idea what's going on. As I was thinking that, I calmly glanced at the surface of the water. Then I saw it. Gi. Ah. Why is it here? That hideous, green monster was reflected on the surface of the water. Gigi. Ah. I can see it. That same, ugly, green skin. Gigi. Ah. Staring at the reflection, I turned my hand. Like a mirror, the reflected image imitated me, and it cheekily turned its hand. Impossible, I thought. Unwilling to accept, I touched my face several times. In response, the reflection on the water moved exactly the same. I struck my hand into the water, shook it several times, causing ripples to crash into the reflection, finally dissipating it. Gigi. Goo. Me. A monster. Still refusing to believe, I looked down on my hand. That same, hideous, green color. Could anyone truly call this human? If so, then a dog's or a pig's hand should also be considered human. I touched my face with that hand, and looked at my reflection on the water. Gigi. Monster. No. I pinched my face. I tugged on it, twisted it, contorted it, anything. Just to prove that that monster was not me. But alas, nothing could. Gugugugu. Kukukuku jaya gugugugu. Ahahaha. I could only laugh. What kind of joke is this? Is there anyone who can explain? Why? I should have gone through life without any problems. I should even be getting a job soon. Yet, why? A monster. How? Is this a dream? As I continued to laugh that parched laugh, what erupted next within me was anger. Why? An anger that no one should have to answer to. I turned my eyes away from the surface of the water and I struck at the ground. The feeling of the earth. The sensation of the grass. And even the juice of that biting louse I'd just crushed. All of them were telling me, screaming at me, the truth of this *TTY reality. Jigurua. I wanted to scream. But what came out of my throat was nothing but a bitter sound that could not even be called a word. Something like this could only be called the cry of a beast, or perhaps, the wails of a newborn. But as reason screamed, so did instinct. I'm hungry. Why? I just ate, didn't I? Yet what is this, craving? I submerged my face in the water, vigorously gulping as much of it as I could. My throat beat as I drank until my belly was full. Then I separated myself from the lake, and laid on the ground. The bright light of the sun is irritating. Fuck. I feel like idiot. I am going to sleep. I took cover beneath a tree's shade. It wasn't much, but it was at least able to lessen that vexing sunlight. There, I closed my eyes. And with the hunger quelled by the water, I gradually fell asleep. It was already dark when I opened my eyes. G.I. *T. I cursed when I opened my eyes. Of course, the voice that came out was more than an incomprehensible groan. I tried raising my hand. Of course, it was that ugly green hand. I'm sure no one would call it pretty with all those bumps on it. G.I. Hey. Leaving the shade of the tree, I looked up the night sky, and it was as if lightning had struck me. Up in the sky was the bright full moon. Yet it hung there brighter and bigger than I last remember, and with another one just like it beside. I've read about this once, from a light novel I once had, A Different World. In that story, people were transported from their world to another world, where they were granted special powers. Those people became heroes and they subjugated the Demon King. Yes, it was one of those cliché happy endings. I don't remember the story much, but could it be? But even so, why would you take my humanity away? Is this one of God's pranks? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't matter. None of it does. In the end, I'm still just an ugly monster. I'm hungry. In my pondering, a cry of instinct echoed, and that insatiable hunger once again lashed out from within. Unconsciously, that hunger numbed my mind. So much so, that my eyes began to swim around as they looked for food. I should drink some water first. After I drank my fill, I stood up. This should be enough for now. I don't know what's going on or whether I can go back or not, but I'll think about that later. What matters now is meat. I need meat. I want to eat. 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 Now that I think about it, I can see pretty well in the dark. I guess this is one of the advantages of being a monster. My eyes begin to swim around, searching for a prey. The instant a moving shadow entered my field of vision, I sprinted for it. Gurua. Moving in the bushes, it was a rabbit. It tried to run away as soon as it noticed me. But, surprisingly, I was able to leap with great strength, allowing me to drive the rabbit into a corner. Then, without the slightest semblance of hesitation, I strangled it to death. Opening my mouth wide, I brought that lifeless corpse's head into my jaw, and I sunk my fangs into its neck. As the blood dripped down its fur from where I'd sunk my fangs, I licked that line of blood lustfully and savored every part of the beast. Ah, delicious! I crunched the cranium. The spinal fluids burst forth. And delightfully, I slurped it, sending gushes of pleasure surging throughout my body. Like that I stave off my hunger. Then I remembered something. Wasn't there a story about a man who became a tiger? Volume 1, Chapter 2. Gekikuju, you are listening at novelfull.audio. I quenched my hunger by going after the small preys. It was through this that I was able to pass the night. The number of prey I had devoured totaled to 4. 2 of which were rabbits, 1 was a frog, and another was a lizard. If I were still human, I would have surely already thrown up with such a meal. There's no more questioning it with this meal and last night's rest, there's no doubt left within me. Monster. Yes, I am a monster. Seeing this hideous form of mine has already become somewhat normal. At the very least, I no longer quiver when I see myself. Besides, it's not all that bad. I noticed it when I had first hunted. This body is considerably more formidable than that of humans. Eyes that see in the dark, nails that can tear apart its prey, and fangs strong enough to crunch with. Such power could not even be compared to a human's puny strength. Furthermore, there is no longer anything to fear when it comes to unclean water. This body's resistance is exceptional, unclean water won't graze it. Humanity had shed many things through the course of evolution. And those things that humanity has lost, this body still possesses. If I so desired, I could live the rest of my days like this, and I wouldn't have the slightest bit of trouble. Because this body is actually more convenient than my human body. Of course, I'd like to be excused from having to be reduced to living here as a monster. Slumping down beneath the shade of a tree, I began to think. Now, what should I do? I definitely don't want to become a monster. I had once read something about a situation like this before. It was a story about a man who became a tiger. In that story, the man grew insane, and he became not only a tiger in body, but also in mind. I don't wish to end up like that. Chances are, I am in a different world. And most likely, I am no longer human. Then in that case, I must find a way to go back. Now, what should I do? I pondered my course of action to myself as I toyed with the rabbit I'd caught just before daybreak. Thinking back on it, didn't that goblin talk? Get feeds, he said. He said, he certainly did. If so, then he is capable of speech. Since mutual understanding is possible, then wouldn't that imply that there are other goblins as well? I may not know how to return, but if there's a community, then there should be a way for me to get information. With that, I set my mind. I take the rabbit and begin to walk towards that den. But as soon as I did, I felt a chill run up my spine, causing me to stop in my tracks. As I felt that sensation run up me, I immediately jumped into a bush. The fear circulated throughout my whole body, causing my feet to quiver uncontrollably. Curious and alert, I strained my ears. There, a painful whizzing sound entered my ears. At the same time, I spotted a giant spider around the size of 2 grown men, walking like a king. My heart was calm like ice, but my limbs quivered with no signs of stopping. Logic questioned the monster's identity, but my instinct roused some sort of primordial fear towards the beast. My body couldn't help but shake to the power balance between the predator and the prey. The one eating and the one being eaten. 6 completely red, inhuman eyes, swam around as it looked for its prey. While 6 limbs, each comparable to a human's height, carried it. Kisha. The moment I thought that it had suddenly stopped moving, that monster spider abruptly jumped into a bush opposite the bush I was hiding in. Goo! The creature hiding within the opposite bush was startled, and panic-stricken. That creature had the hideous head of a pig, and at the same time, it had 2 legs to walk on. In other words, an orc. Panicked, the orc tried to run away, but the monster spider chased after it. The orc tried to jump out of the bushes, but the monster spider skillfully moved its long limbs with a speed far too fast for the eye's see, driving it into a corner. Driven into a corner, the orc was pushed down from behind with 2 of the spider's legs. Then, the monster spider brought its chilling jaws towards the orc's head. With a chomp, it bit into the head of the orc, crushing its cranium and releasing a plethora of spinal fluid, brain matter, and blood, into its mouth. As the pieces of that hideous pig head swam within that carnivorous aperture, the monster spider voraciously devoured every single bit of it as it took its time, enjoying mealtime. Seeing the battle of the 2 monsters at the top of the food chain unfold right before my eyes, this monstrous body of mine could not help but shake. However, I gathered every sense of reason I had within my body, mustering whatever courage I could to leave without a sound. After I'd taken some distance, I immediately sprinted as fast as I could and I headed towards the den. I, who have and should have lived amongst humans all my life, had just been awoken to the absurdity of nature, the law of the jungle. Gigi. Incomprehensible sounds escaped my mouth, as I screamed while I ran. But upon reaching the den, I could not help but feel hesitant to enter that dark and narrow hole. However, I could spare no time dallying, for that giant spider may come at any moment. Having no time left, I raised my voice, and called out towards the den. A short while passed, and the goblin from before came out. Feed. The same, hideous face, accompanied by a gaze that couldn't be described as anything else but hate. However, there was one thing that startled me, the difference in our heights. Though I had only passed a night outside, it would appear that I had already sprouted a fair bit. I handed the rabbit to the goblin, and it glanced at it, without saying a word. Then it disappeared into the den. I didn't know whether I should chase after it or not, but after a while, it came back out. With a stern look, it roared at me. Come. Enemy, coming. The goblin strongly pulled on my arm, and brought me into the den. I leaked a cry to that overbearing strength. Apparently, it never had any intentions of holding back in the first place. The goblin then threw me into a room, and it quickly went over to pick up a club. Get. As I looked around me, I noticed something. The room may appear to be a little shoddy, but it is actually an armory. In any case, it wants me to pick one, right? As I felt fear towards the goblin, I searched the armory for a weapon. Unfortunately, they were all of poor quality. It's not like I was expecting these monsters to have a Japanese katana or a spear, but even then, I was hoping for something that at least resembled a weapon. With that in mind, I labored to find something more fitting of fantasy, like something that resembled a long sword. Unfortunately, all I could find was a reasonably long club, a pointed picket, and a fork that was used for farming. Well, better than nothing I suppose. I convinced myself as such and took the club. "Come," said the goblin as we quickly left the room. While I was half in thought, I followed after it. "Hurry." The guy urged me to go faster, while I had to go reduce its unrestrained club. I had thought that it only wanted me to pick a weapon, but then it drove me to the surface, and then it even made me run. Finally, after being thoughtlessly hurried, we arrived at our supposed destination, a village that looks to be abandoned. I couldn't really tell though, as to whether it was really an abandoned village or not, as I could spot some squirming shadows. What are those? It turns out that what had gathered there was a large number of green goblins. And at the center of that was a boss-like existence that had red skin. "Come." The goblin that came with me took my arm by the hand, and brought me over to where that red boss was. As the goblin brought me, I couldn't help but open my eyes wide at that thing that couldn't be thought to have any trace of majesty. The red goblin was of respectable stature, it big arms, a sharp glint in the eye, and more than anything, a hideous countenance. It was outfitted with a rusted armor, and a sword with a chip in the blade. Looking at it, I couldn't help but want to doubt that we were of the same race. "King, come." "This, pipsqueak." Hearing those fragmented words, I had a fairly good guess at what these two's relationship was. The red one is their king, and these goblins are his servants. And so, this guy is making me have an audience with the king as someone who is even lower than him. Then abruptly, the king looked at me. "You, last. Slow one, give punishment." In other words, he wishes to punish me because I'm last. "Don't screw with me, who do you think you are?" As I thought that, the goblin beside the irritating red goblin already had me pinned down. "Me, gentle. Will not kill you." Looking up, my eyes intersected with the red goblin's eyes. When I saw that monster's eyes, I thought to myself that I would never forget that sight. Those eyes were muddied with a sense of superiority and contempt. The kind of condescending look that a parent, a teacher, or a sheedy sibling would give you. Then I felt my back get hit. Gujajai. Feeling that pain, I couldn't help but let out a cry. That red goblin was hitting me with a club, while showing signs of pleasure. It felt like it enjoyed it, persecuting me, and hitting me several times. After a moment, it stopped, and then it stepped on my head and said this. "Me, king. Do not disobey. I'll kill you. I don't know where this is, but I'll definitely kill you." In this nightmarish world, for the first time, I was able to take back a nostalgic emotion. It was a world of difference from that desire to eat, that was leading me just a while ago. I don't mind even if you say it's human. Perhaps you could say that such an emotion shouldn't have been born in a world like this that is upheld by the law of the jungle. In such a world where the strong is always strong, and the weak is always weak. Reply. As hate filled me, enough to the point where it could trickle, I replied. "Guy, I won't defy." As blue blood bled from my body, I swore, "I'm going to kill this goblin." As I swore a curse while the goblin boss was stepping over me, I heard a voice that was close to a scream from somewhere distant. Emmy. All of a sudden, I was kicked aside, and the red boss raised its voice. While I was thrown away to the ground like trash, I absent-mindedly stared at that scene. Beside the red goblin were many goblins, and at the end of its sight were 3 orcs. Those orcs mowed down several dozens of goblins as it drew near the red goblin. But despite the overwhelming number of the goblins, the orcs that were 2 times their size easily swept them with its club. They aren't a match. That was my honest impression. With that big of a difference in body, there's no way they could win an upfront fight. With a swing, their heads were crushed, and their spinal fluids burst. The goblins attacked the orc one after another. But their bulky blades were stopped by the orc's fat, and were unable to deliver a fatal wound. During all of this, the Red Goblin only stared at the goblins without going out to help. That red boss only looked on at those orcs as they were surrounded by a wall of green goblins. As it looked on, it even made the goblins beside it join the fight. But such a thing was meaningless. Something like that could not possibly hope to stop the ever-pushing orcs. And using their bodies, the orcs were able to break through the wall of goblins. One goblin falling was all that was needed. As long as one fell, the wall, too, would follow. But it's not like the orcs were without wounds. In fact, the orcs had wounds all over their body, so much so, that they were angered. You could see their eyes flicker with anger, with no trace of any reason left. They must have been desperate to get out of that encirclement. And then one of those orcs drew towards the red goblin, and it crashed with it. Garuru. Guga. Although it was the clashing of two monsters, it ended quickly. All that was left was the expected result. That orc ignored the deep cut from its shoulder, sent the red goblin flying, and they disappeared into the forest. As for the red goblin, I think it's lost its consciousness. It's not even twitching. As I thought that, I noticed a sword from the edge of my eyes. The sword that was dropped, the sword with a chipped blade. Too tump. In that instant, I heard my heart's beat as it began to race. I mustered whatever strength I could, ignoring the grumbling of the monster as I sit up. GG, well. This is quite the fortuitous turn of events, isn't it? Right. Despite being lightheaded, I grabbed that thing that caught my attention. The long sword with a chipped blade. Then I drew near that motionless red goblin. It shouldn't have died after just that. Jijiji. Die, scum. I thrust the long sword into the red goblin's neck with all of my strength. When the sword's tip had deeply pierced its throat, I swung the sword horizontally. Gigagigugwa. DJI, and as the red goblin's death throw echoed, it breathed its last, and then it ceased. Goo, bababa, I killed it. Gigagagugagu, what is this? I'm actually a lot more rattled than I'd expected. Jigu. As I thought that, I felt something burst from inside me, causing me to fall to my knees. Guha. As I felt something strange from within me, I couldn't help but hold my head. Something was happening. Something inexplicable, a horrifying sensation of some sort, eating me from inside. There, I heard a sword fall with a thud from a distance. Only a second had passed, yet it felt like an hour of pain. As that pain receded, I looked around. Too quiet. Looking around, I found to my surprise that the goblins were all looking at me. Am I in trouble? Unfortunately though, I cannot muster even the slightest strength. Not even the strength to run away. As I feared for the worst, a goblin stepped forward. King. What? What did this goblin say just now? King. Your orders. Doubtingly, I stared back at those clumsy words, then I looked at my arms. Red, hideous, and hard like steel. How should I describe the emotions I felt at this time? It wasn't the simple happiness of becoming strong. Nor was it repugnance from being tainted with ugliness. Rather, I was intoxicated. To what I wonder. But regardless, I am definitely intoxicated. Volume 1, Chapter 3. Orc Hunt. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 10 mornings and 10 evenings had passed since the day they called me king. I left most of the hunting to my underlings while I pondered to myself what I'd just experienced. What I'd experienced was something impossible. Something that could only be seen in a game. If I had to put it into words, then what I'd experienced was a level up, or in other terms, an evolution. What should I think of this hypothesis? It's not as if I don't feel sad to have such childish thoughts. However, I can find no other way to express it. This is a fantasy. What is? Lost in my thoughts, I let out my voice. When my adjutant heard that, he couldn't help but inquire. It's nothing. Speaking of convenience, I've become somewhat capable of speech. And ever since the day I became a red goblin, or for convenience's sake a goblin rare, the difference in the treatment the goblins had toward me, compared to before, was like the difference between heaven and earth. Why did their behavior change? To put it earnestly, it's because of the power I now have. The law of the jungle. That is the irrationality of this world, the absurdity, the rule that was driven into me. Right now, I may not be able to call my life comfortable, but at the very least, I am able to live unrestrained. Honestly speaking, being called a king despite only having 20 creatures under me feels like a diminution of the term king. This is a position that I received upon becoming a goblin rare, however. The surging thoughts within my head piled up even further. Regarding that level up. I wonder. Did I turn into this because I killed that goblin rare? Or was I perhaps already in the process of evolving, and it only so happens that I evolved the moment I killed it? As layers of hypotheses began to overlap, I thought to myself, if it's that, then as long as I wasn't killed, I would eventually become like this. However, if it's the other, then if I kill something else I can gain an even greater power. In other words, if I were to kill an orc, I would become an orc. If I killed that giant spider, then... No. I supplant my hypothesis. If it's really an evolution, then is it even possible for a creature to turn into something completely different? But then again, this is fantasy. Nothing should be impossible. By what logic, by what reason was it that my body was changed so much in a short period of time? I don't know. The only thing I'm certain of is that this isn't a miracle. I need more samples. Right. You. Yes. Are there other kings like me? The adjutant-like goblin looked around restlessly, then it brought its ugly face close to me, and then said this. One there. Another over there. Two in that direction. Hey, aren't there quite a bit? But this should mean that there's an existence that holds power even greater than mine. At the very least, there should be quite a few of them amongst the goblins. Is there someone, above the kings? Oh, this is a pretty good question. I might actually get something good out of this. A great king, muttered the goblin as it shook its head. Seeing it shake its head like this, it's actually quite amiable. But a great king, huh? If it says that there's no such thing, then at the very least, there shouldn't be one to the extent of this adjutant's knowledge. I began to ponder again. A great king, huh? I came to understand this the moment I became a goblin rare, but apparently, these creatures called goblin are at the bottom of this forest's so-called hierarchy. The small animals aside, the only ones beneath the goblins are those on the level of the kobolds and the slimes. The goblins are a far cry from the orcs. And as for those on the level of the giant spider, we're not even in the same league. Because of that, we risk our lives when we go out to hunt for food. The orcs who steal our spoils, and the giant spider who eats goblins. We struggle through many things, but no matter what, a relapse of that intense hunger I felt before cannot be permitted. King. Feed, here. With the arrival of the hunting squad, I remembered my hunger, and I began to stroke my belly. However, as I began to rub my belly, I grabbed my stomach that seemed like it was about to cry, and I furrowed my brows deeply. King. The feed. The goblins respectfully offered to me a small animal. Then it came to my attention that they were all half dead. Some have lost an arm, others have had their ears bitten. And then, there are even those who are bleeding blue blood. What happened? At my inquiry, the goblins of the hunting squad looked at each other. Orc, they whispered, as they all lowered their heads and sunk their shoulders. Do they think I'm going to rebuke them for this? That aside, it would appear that they were robbed. Got it. I casually snatched their offering and put it in my stomach. Orc bastards. Why? Why is it that I, who feels no sense of goodwill, and in fact even feel hate and repugnance toward these goblins, can feel a mysterious anger budding within me? I've decided. I'm hunting the orcs. As those thoughts surfaced, a desire to fight simmered from inside me. Is it because of the changes in my body? I don't recall ever being a war freak. To think that I could actually be roused this easily, I almost don't want to believe it. Putting those thoughts aside, I began to think of a way to hunt the orcs. Sun Tzu once said, "Know yourself, know your enemy, and you will not need to fear the result of 100 battles." Actually, I don't really need to borrow the words of such a great person. What I have to do has already been decided. Thanks to the previous case, I already know all too well just how much stronger the orcs are compared to the goblins. However, I must kill them. Then in that case, what should be done? The idea of the previous goblin rare to defeat the orcs with number wasn't wrong. If there is an opponent that you need to defeat, and that foe happens to be stronger than you by itself, then what should one do? The answer: numbers. This is a strategy that humans have applied since time immemorial. The humans work together and form groups. Then in order to sharpen their killing efficiency, they made use of weapons. And in order to bring out the most out of their numbers, they came up with strategies and tactics. However, our enemy this time isn't a human. It's an orc. There's no need to go that far for something like that. To put it briefly, what I'm going to use this time is a kind of weapon. Only, the goblins who are powerless are unable to cut through the fat of the orcs with normal weapons. Go after the orcs. Information about them is necessary. If they notice you, run. I need to be strict with this command. In order to win, the power in numbers is a must. For orcs, and even for those beyond them. All the way until the top of this forest's hierarchy. I pass the orders to my goblin underlings. Search for the orcs, and come back alive. I don't know how much they can abide by these two orders, but it's imperative if we are to kill the orcs. The goblins dispersed, and then I went into the forest to stock up on weapons. 3 days has passed since I sent the goblins into the forest to find the orcs. During that time, I stocked up on the necessary weapons in the forest. From the information the goblins had gathered, just yesterday they were able to find an orc that moved alone. At that, I gave the goblins orders to observe that orc to confirm that it traveled the same road every day, and then to quickly get some food before going back. This is war. A war between an orc and 21 goblins. One can't fight on an empty stomach. This is a truth that has even surpassed the barriers of race, and is shared by all. As I recalled that, I ordered the hunting squad to find feeds, while I set the weapons at the site the orc will pass. There. At my orders, the goblins began to dig a hole with undivided attention. A hole only big enough to allow a single orc to fall completely, and deep enough so that it can never climb back up. This is the one advantage that goblins have over orcs. Goblins are horrible at fighting, but when it comes to digging, their speed is in a different league. Now that I think about it, even the dark den I was born in could only be entered through a tunnel big enough for a single goblin. Find the orcs, and come back alive. That was the order I gave to the goblins. And with their actions they showed me their loyalty. Then in that case, I should respond accordingly to that loyalty. To slay the enemy, that is the duty of I, who has 20 goblins under his command. Right. The goblins kept digging the hole till nighttime. When they finished, we filled and disguised it, then we went back to our den. Volume 1, Chapter 4. Orc Hunt 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The orc walked through the open road with complete confidence. It lorded over its surroundings while it wielded a boorish club. It had great confidence as it knew that it was a predator. But alas, who could blame it? Confidence breeds personality. And that also allows it to avoid unwanted trouble. However, today, that isn't the case. Because that orc is headed towards the trap that we prepared last night. Lying hidden amongst the thicket, I eagerly awaited its demise. Go, but just right before it stepped over the trap, that orc that looked like it didn't have the slightest bit of brain in it, suddenly stopped. Its nose twitching, the orc was wary of its surroundings as cold sweat permeated the orc. At the back of my head, I couldn't help but hope that the orc would quickly move. Guru! The orc roared. Just when I thought we may have been discovered, I heard a scream bellow next to me. Ga, Ga, Ga. One of the goblins beside me was panicked after hearing the orc's cry. In its panic, it exited the thickets. Immediately, without even having the time to worry, the orc's sight moved towards the panicked goblin. Guga. Seeing that, I clicked my tongue as I jumped out. Stay, there. I ordered my other subordinates that, as I swung the chipped blade of my long sword against the orc. Its skin was so frighteningly tough, that as soon as my sword came into contact with it, my fingers became numb. It was as if I had just swung against a giant tree. And just as I had expected, the orc wasn't the slightest bit hurt from my attack. Irritated, the orc roared in anger as it turned its eyes towards me. At the same moment, I felt my guts begin to quiver. And as if my body was greatly burdened, my arms and my legs became heavy. The stare of that orc was such that it felt like I was underwater. I wasn't even able to breathe. What is this? Slowly, it brandished its club. In response to that, my body couldn't help but move slowly. I'm going to die, that feeling made itself visible through my skin. Barely able to jump in time, a ferocious wind blew along with that club as it swung past my eyes. New, AAA. To that, I let out a cry from the pits of my stomach that sounded like a desperate attempt to rid myself of fear. I confirmed my grip. I sharpened my eyes, and I clenched my teeth. As the sweeping club came at me, I jumped back and I dodged it. Then confirming the trap's position, I moved towards it. As I dragged my heavy body towards it, I dodged the orc's fiendish club at me countless times. Just one hit, and even my brain would be crushed, but gradually, I managed to close in on the trap's position. Only 3 more steps left. But at that moment, as I tried to step back, I tripped over a stone. That pain made me let out a cry. Goo! As my posture broke, I momentarily lost my focus on that orc. Not good. I looked at the orc at the same time I tried to fix my posture. But it was already too late. The orc's club was already right before my eyes. With nothing left to lose, I jumped behind. I should have raised my sword to receive the blow, but I was already within the orc's range. As a sharp blow hit me, my left shoulder was crippled. Guru, the gap between species is truly big. Guruwa. The orc let out a piercing howl as it raised its club once more. Unable to move my legs, all I could do was to stare at that club. Am I going to be killed by that? By something like that? No, absolutely not. Guru. As the club tried to claim my life, a howl erupted from within me, denying its claim. Goo. Then it stopped. That club that should have taken my life stopped right before my eyes. And the orc let out a surprised voice. As the fear of that club's overwhelming pressure caused me to permeate with cold sweat, I looked at the corner of my eyes. Then my eyes opened wide. At the same time, the orc turned its head to look behind it. Gugujiji. What stood there was a goblin stabbing the orc with a spear made out of cut bamboo. It was the panicked one from before. Gwa. The enraged howl of the orc echoed. The orc turned to face my subordinate, seemingly having already considered me, who had already fallen to my knees, powerless. Yet though they were only facing each other, the goblin was already shaking. Stand! Stand, damn it! Goo, goo, the moment the orc swung its club against my subordinate. Gurua. My attack aimed at its shoulder managed to make it in time. As I felt its skin's toughness, dark red blood sprayed out. The arm that was hit flew into the air, and it fell into the ground. Then the orc moved its gaze towards me. Shrieking in anger, it rushed towards me. Maddened by rage, bloodlust gushed forth, and drool was scattered all over. That appearance made the orc look like a true crazed demon. As the orc rushed towards me with a scream that could no longer be put into words, I thought, good. Come here just like that. Then I jumped back 3 steps to dodge. As soon as that crazed orc stepped right in front of me, the ground collapsed. The ground collapsed because of the orc's weight, and it sunk deep into it, where countless spears and swords pierced through its legs and loins. Again, it let out a shriek. However, this time, it was out of agony. With only its upper body poking out of the collapsed hole, the orc sent me a killing glare. It was more enraged than it was in pain as its hands bore into the ground, trying to dig itself out. I win. I approached the orc, and with my sword, I hit its defenseless head. Dark red spinal fluid gushed forth, and the howl of victory bellowed. Gurua. I let out a cry as I waved my blood-stained sword. And once more, that sensation of being eaten from within attacked me, and dominated me. Enduring the urge to cry out, I pierced the sword into the ground and I braced myself. Ah, as that hoarse voice leaked out, I felt the sensation of evolution, level up, end. After it had completely left, I took a look at my arm. My hands that should have had 3 fingers, now number 4. And the thickness of my arms had also increased another size, coupled with an abnormal muscle mass. Moreover, the pain that should be there after having my shoulder crushed was missing. But amongst the changes of my body, the one that stood out the most was my skin's color. That previously red skin had completely changed to bluish black. Having confirmed my body's changes, I took a look around me. There I saw that the goblin from a while ago had also evolved, and was now a goblin rare, kneeling at my feet. My king. The goblins that were lying in wait in the thickets also rushed out and kneeled. King. As I looked over them without the slightest semblance of joy, the seeds of ambition began to sprout from within. Volume 1, Chapter 5. The sprouting ambition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The vast, blue sky. The lake dancing to the passing wind. And my reflection projected on this mirror-like lake. Sometimes this world is just so beautiful it leaves me speechless. However, in comparison to that breathtaking beauty, sharpened fangs, dazzling pupils like that of a beast, and a face, rather than ugly, be better described as ferocious. I couldn't help but think to myself, I've completely turned into a monster. My lips twisted at my self-loathing, and the reflected goblin smiled a dread-inducing smile. My king. We will arrive soon. The goblin that had just become a goblin rare called out to me. I took him with me, and we went back to the goblin settlement. BVEC. It's been a few days since we killed the orc. In that time I got used to my body, and taught my goblin subordinates how to use traps, and even showed them how to put it into practice. I taught them how to make a hole, and kill the prey that has fallen into it with a spear. Even though it's such a simple trap, the amount of damage that we receive has been greatly reduced. My body has also become bigger by a size compared to the time when I was a goblin rare. When I tested just how different this goblin noble's body, I named it so by the way, compared to the goblin rares, I found out that there was a large difference in hearing, sight, and strength between the two. For example, I can now strangle the triple-horned boar, to death. And I can now kill the ostrich with 2 necks, double head, with my chipped blade. In other words, I can now easily do the things that were impossible for my body before. I've also come to a conclusion regarding my evolutions. I can't evolve into anything else except a goblin. It doesn't matter how strong and estranged one becomes from a goblin. It's not possible to transcend the race. A goblin will remain a goblin. The fact that I turned into a goblin noble from a goblin rare, despite killing an orc, is proof of that. If this is the case, then all that's left is to try out the next evolution. I personally killed the prey that was driven into a corner by my subordinate. Then I asked a subordinate about something that was bothering me. How do goblins increase their population? Recently, an ambition had begun to sprout inside me. An ambition to build my own kingdom. In order to make that a reality, the thing I need the most is an army. I don't have any inconvenience with my pieces right now. But I have to increase not only the quality of my subordinates, but also myself. And while I put emphasis on quality, I know very well not to underestimate number. For example, if my subordinates were to group up against me, I would probably lose. Well, that's if it was just a question of strength, that is. But still. I know very well just how terrifying the dread of raw number is. After all, I was beaten up by that so-called number in my country in the past. I may have digressed a bit, but, right. How can I increase the number of goblins? The one who answered that was a senior even amongst the goblins. That senior goblin talked about a village. And as I heard that explanation, I couldn't help but think. To begin with, these group are all goblins who have strayed from that village. And in that village are female goblins, and females of other species who were kidnapped and impregnated in order to increase the population. That I suppose it's that fantasy stereotype then. The previous goblin rare who led these goblins forbade the lesser-ranked goblins from copulating with the females, causing the younger goblins to be alienated. This is that group. Really, what a sloppy story. When I asked how far that village was, I found out that it was surprisingly close. That village had around 50 warriors. The old goblins, and the ones that were just born and can't fight, number around 30. By nature the race called goblins did not have male and female relationships, and just went out to hunt and get praise. But it would appear that the reason these goblins didn't have a female with them is because they left the village to find one for themselves. When I asked whether the females just fell from the sky over there, apparently, they purposely kidnapped them from other races. A rather novel practice if I say so myself. I led my 20 subordinates towards the goblin village. Our purpose was of course not peace. But before the thrashing comes a bit of scouting. After all, it's important to know whether there is someone stronger than me or not inside that village. I wonder if the leader of this group is properly leading its goblins. Then again, since there were goblins who left it, I suppose this group's unity isn't that good. Still, I better check how strong the top brass of this group is. As I calmed my ferocious thoughts, I led my subordinates to the village. The village looked to have previously belonged to humans, as I could see some old fences here and there. And the houses that the goblins were using looked to be quite big for them. I suppose they plundered the village from the humans or some other similar race who used to live here. There was also a north and south gate which allowed a great number of people to pass through at any given time. As I carefully walked around that village that was surrounded by a thick forest, it came to my attention that there were few adult goblins inside. In fact, I couldn't even find the goblin rare, and the number of adults all in all wouldn't even reach 10. As for the females, I wasn't able to find them at all. Then again, if the females are of a different species, then they're probably being confined inside a building. As for the adults missing, they're most likely out hunting. All of a sudden the village became noisy. Throwing my eyes towards the direction of the south gate, I saw the goblins return as they were led by an armored goblin rare that wielded a brand new long sword. Trailing behind the armored goblin rare were around 20 goblins. I could also see some animals that looked like wolves. Alright, with this I've seen everything I needed to see. There might be another platoon elsewhere, so I better secure this place before they arrive. I laughed with a broad grin, causing my fangs to show. Then I turned to my subordinates as I restrained myself, and I gave them an order. We're entering the village from the front. We stepped out of the forest, and we passed through the steep road towards the village gate. The moment I was seen, the goblins of the village made an uproar, but I looked on them condescendingly while I proceeded to walk with an air of composure. Or at the very least, I walked to give off that kind of atmosphere. Without either going too fast or too slow. I gave a glance with a glint of pressure on the goblins before me as I walked towards the goblin rare. Gururu. As the goblin rare let out shrieks of fear, I looked down on it, and laughed provokingly. Are you the king of this group? I asked in a low, and frightening voice. The goblin rare stepped back. Then I raised my voice at the goblin rare that didn't answer. So it's you. The atmosphere shook at my voice, causing even me to be surprised. But while I was a bit shocked, I took a quick glance around me, and I found out that there were even goblins who've become unable to stand because of fear. The goblin rare in front of me was of course not affected to that extent, but it was still clearly frightened. That's right. It avoided my gaze, and its armor began to rattle as it shook. Choose. Either you give me your group or you die. Which is it? During times like this I should put up a haughty front. The best way to make others acknowledge you in a world that practices the law of the jungle, and even more so an estranged one like this, is to put up a front like what I'm doing. Being polite in a place like this will only spoil the other party. That's why it's imperative to properly teach the hierarchy to beasts like this. Guru, as it let out a groan, the goblin rare didn't appear to have any intentions of fighting. However, I put the long sword I had with me over my shoulder, making it look like I could crush the goblin rare in front of me at any time. I lorded over the leader of the group as I confirmed the success of the negotiation. The goblin, seemingly having been overcome by the atmosphere, threw its long sword to the ground. And then it prostrated itself before me. With its legs having been thrown down at the ground, and its head, hanging, the goblin rare showed me that it had completely yielded to me. My king. I offer to you your desire. Then I'll accept. I looked over the entire settlement, and then I declared, from now on the king of this village is I. That day I took my first small step towards my ambition. Volume 1, Chapter 6. Status: you are listening at novelfull.audio. Race: Goblin. Level: 14. Class: Noble. King of a group. Possessed skills: Divine Protection. None. As I focused my consciousness inside my head, I could feel an existence similar to that of a status. When I first heard about this from the old goblin from the village, I was greatly bewildered. However, I quickly came to understand just how important this was when it came to understanding my own abilities. According to the old goblin, all one needed to do was for one to focus his or her own consciousness inside his mind, and something reminiscent of a status will come out. But to think that it would actually give such precise numbers. Moreover, these words, and on top of these, there are levels, skills, and even divine protection. This world is truly becoming more and more like a real fantasy, and I just can't help but smile wryly at that thought. Also, I found out that the so-called level up, evolution, that I felt before was actually me going up a class level. I can understand it just by looking at this status. The level shown is a level within that class. A level 14 of the class, Goblin Noble. So if I were a goblin rare, then it would be something like this. Race: Goblin. Class: Rare. King of a group. But what's more is that you can even see the effects of the acquired skills. The abilities of your subordinates will slightly increase. Resistance to the pressure of higher races will slightly increase. Creatures whose classes are lower than oneself will become slower. If the class is the same, then it will depend on the level. If used towards one's subordinates, it will allow one to force an order. Compensates one's swordsmanship. Increases the number one can lead. Normally, one would learn this skill right after being born, and then go out to hunt, but in my case, since I became affiliated with an estranged group, and since that group was estranged, it didn't have a person capable enough to draw it out, so until now I haven't been able to learn it. That estranged group is really too impulsive. According to the old goblin, skills are something that increase as one evolves, and when one clears some special conditions. I'm extremely grateful to have skills like and as these are things that are absolutely essential in order to make my ambition a reality. As for well, it's not like nothing comes to mind. I'm fairly sure this ability took effect while fighting the orc when I was able to move my body. Or alternatively, I may have learned this ability during that moment instead. Goblins do normally tend to freeze up with just a howl, so I guess they need more guts and fighting spirit. In fact, now that I think about it, I wonder if the previous leader of this group also had this skill. After all, even though it was like that, he still did have the guts to challenge the orcs. Then again, there's really no point in thinking about a dead guy. Now, as for swordsmanship, I probably got it from using that chipped long sword. As for the rank, see, I don't really know to what extent this is, but it's probably not too bad. Probably. Sooner or later it'll probably be a good idea to try out something else though. As for, it seems to have quite a number of uses. In fact, I'm fairly certain I used this ability when I made the goblin rare yield to capture this settlement. After I finished analyzing my own abilities, and getting a good grasp of it. What's next is information. First of all, how is it that a group with supposedly 50 goblins have become this weak? It's true that because of that I was able to avoid needless conflict, but as I asked the old goblin about it, I once again failed to hold back a wry smile at the goblins' position in the hierarchy. Apparently, the goblins were oppressed and a group of orcs migrated nearby. And the goblin rare that yielded to me was actually not the leader back when that estranged group left. By the way, since this goblin rare didn't have a name, I decided to name him Gi Gu for convenience's sake. They have changed leaders 3 times in total so far, so it's actually easy to tell just how oppressed they were. I might digress here a bit, but when I gave that goblin rare, Gi Gu, a name, it seems to have been touched, and has now become emotionally attached to me. Apparently, naming is an act that greatly delights the goblins. Incidentally, the other goblin rare that had just recently evolved and came to like spears was named Gi Ga. I could have named him Mataza, but that was too cool for him, so I didn't. Oh. You want to know how I'm naming them? Well, what else is there to differentiate with aside from their cries? Afterwards, I made a rule to give a name to any goblin once they evolve into a goblin rare. Then I went to inspect our reserves and weapons. It was a small village, so finding things weren't difficult at all. But I was quite sad at how meager their equipment were. As for their reserves, well, even if I said it was 0 it wouldn't be an exaggeration. Apparently their spoils for that day was everything. And it seems that from time to time, when they get an excess of food, they'll have some leftovers for the next day. But aside from that there's usually none. As for their equipment, a damaged pelt armor and a rusted iron spear caught my attention. Naturally, high-class stuff like shield and helms weren't around. There were also several axe-like things along with forks and small scythes used for farming that originally belonged to the village. But these alone are not enough, so they've literally been using only their bodies as their weapons. As a result, the number of injured amongst the goblins have been increasing, and they've been greatly disadvantaged in the struggle for survival in the forest. In order to mend this, I immediately told the spear-wielder Giga to teach the other goblins how to use traps. At the same time I told the goblins that already knew how to gather some food. Then I ordered the former leader, Gi Gu, to investigate the orcs' numbers and location. Just like before, the minimum conditions for success is to come back alive. After I ordered him to find out the area the orcs operated in and their numbers, they all left to do their jobs. Speaking of which, what's the village's non-fighting population? Half. Well, whatever the case is, the ones I can consider as warriors number around 20. While the elders, the larvae, and the rest all number 30. Those larvae need to grow up and become able to fight as soon as possible. After the goblins are done learning how to use traps, I should immediately start the education of these larvae. But the most important matter at hand is still how to increase the population of the goblins. Right now, there are around 10 females in this village. 3 of them are larvae, while the other 7 are able fighters. And then there are 3 more from a different species who were kidnapped, and are now being confined. Their species: humans. Young female humans. And in fact, some of them were already pregnant. Surprisingly though, when I saw those girls, I, who has turned into a monster, felt irritation swell up deep inside my chest. Smiling wryly to myself, I quickly expelled those thoughts, and I pondered about their value. Right now everything is insufficient. But if I had these humans' help, wouldn't I be able to posture myself better? Looking down on them, I called, "Oi, woman!" But it was a meaningless endeavor. There was no longer anything inside their eyes. They were like empty holes where nothing neither glimmered nor reflected. And like an endless abyss, their eyes swayed as they muttered pitiful whispers that petitioned for death. Seeing that, I looked down as hatred took me. Empty dolls. Human dolls. Humans whose will have been flayed off, and are now living against their will with only one purpose, to give birth to goblins. Ah, I see. The moment it hit me that one of these may have given birth to me, I decided to execute them. So with my own hands, I offed their heads in a flash. In order not to give them any more pain. In order not to give them any more suffering, I ended the lives of these women, of which one may have been my mother, quickly and painlessly. Not a drop of tear was shed. The old goblin complained to me, but I silenced it with a glare full of killing intent. Then I walked around the shed, piling up dry woods one over another around it, and set it ablaze. As the red sky was dyed by that flame of requiem, the repose of souls, the shed was thoroughly burnt to cinders. Why? For what reason did I? That I thought that to myself as I gripped my hand tightly and made a fist. When the flame died out, my subordinates returned. After I checked the food they brought back, I went to sleep. Possessed skills, acquired. This is an unawakened skill. From now on it will change depending on your experience. Divine protection. You have been granted the divine protection of the goddess of the underworld, Altesia. The attributes of death and darkness have been added to you. Volume 1, Chapter 7. Bloodbath. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Race, Goblin, Level, 14, Class, Noble, King of a Group, Possessed Skills, Divine Protection, Goddess of the Underworld, Altesia, Attributes, Darkness, Death. After the night had left, I noticed the changes in my status. The divine protection of the goddess of the underworld, huh? My lips twisted. Don't fuck with me. What the hell do you think a person's heart is? But I leave it at that. Thinking anything more than this is troublesome, so I went outside and asked the old goblin about it. Apparently the so-called divine protection is something that is generally decided by the gods, and is something that we mortals have no control over. Fuckers, that was my impression of the gods. But after a bit, I changed my mind. I ordered myself to calm down. If you're a cruel monster, then act like it. If something is useful, then make use of it. I suppressed that seething anger deep within me like lava. If I couldn't even do this, then what right do I have to call myself king? But then again, why? Why did I? To someone who might have been my mother. Do such a thing. Regarding attributes, it is apparently possible to demonstrate specialized magic based on one's divine protection. Magic. I kind of expected this, but the fact that there really was something like this made me let out a strained laugh. Precisely, seriously replied the old goblin. According to the old goblin's explanation, a class known as Druid appears to be able to use it, but there aren't any in the village. Considering how little this village has, I'm not surprised. But there is something I'm concerned about regarding our war potential. Is there anyone who can control beasts? If wild dogs are fine, then, apparently the beasts one can use depends on one's level. And right now, the most the goblins in this village can do is to raise 3 wild dogs. I suppose this can be considered not bad, all things considered. As long as their level is raised, then it should be possible to make use of even triple boars and double heads. But really, 3 wild dogs. What's the difference with just raising them up normally? I kept that Tsukomi at the back of my head, and nodded. I suppose the war potential of the village is only this much. All that's left is the variation of the environment, but that's something that depends on the scouting of the former leader, Gi-gu. While that goblin is still out, the spear-wielding Giga has already returned. His spoils for the day include a double head, a rabbit, a snake and some fruits. There's actually quite a lot. As expected, having a lot of people is really good. The biggest spoil for the day is the double head. Who would have thought they'd actually be able to kill this big of a beast? As a reward I should give him that rusted iron spear. Giga was deeply touched at my action, so I had to deal with that, after which I then went to distribute the meal amongst the people in the village. It was evening by the time the reconnaissance team led by Gi-gu came back. I let them have their fill as I listened to their report. There are 5 orcs all in all, and they work separated during the day and night. 3 work during the night, while the other 2 work in the day. I thought that was all he would be able to find out, so I was quite surprised when I found out he was even able to investigate their routes. Gi-gu, quite a thinker. I granted him the best part of the double head's meat, and had him leave after I told him to be the guide tomorrow. Now, what should I do? The next day we went out to hunt the orcs. I took over 20 goblins with me, with Gi-gu and Giga as heads. Then when we got to our destination, we laid some ropes made out of vines at my feet. There are plenty of open roads amongst the places that the orcs like to travel. And even when patrolling, they try to make it so that there's no thatches or trees around them. Right now, I'm standing in the way of their route with the goblins hiding in the bushes at my left and right, and then the orcs came. I gripped my chipped sword, and with a simple provocation, the orcs came rushing at me like a bunch of brainless fools. Now. At my signal, the ropes scattered at my feet were all simultaneously pulled. As the ropes were pulled, the orcs tripped on it and fell. One of them were down for the count, but the other was able to recover its stance. But it was already too late. As the orc somehow recovered its stance, my sword came flying at it. And in a flash, its head was smashed. Spinal fluids came gushing forth as the orc fell lifeless to the ground. The other orc tried to stand up, but the ropes were pulled again. The orc unmoving, I went for its legs. Blood flowing, its 2 legs rolled away. And as the orc screamed, my face twisted into a smile. Do it. The goblins came out of the thickets, carrying the spears I'd made out of wood for them. Regardless of how tough an orc's skin is, the eyes, the mouth, and the wounds are all fair game, right? Blood spurting, spears piercing, an orc screaming. The symphony of torture played in the open road, leading the orc to death's embrace. As a result, my level rose, but my class didn't change. I was hoping another goblin rare would come out, but unfortunately that also didn't happen. When we tried eating the orc's meat, we found out that it was indescribably delicious, so we brought it back home to feed to the larvae. When night came, we went to hunt the rest of the orcs. I've already sent some goblins to monitor the orcs' home. As soon as they move out, we'll give chase. But before then, I figured I'd prepare them a gift. So I painted their route with their comrades' blood, scattering it in drops, here and there. Like the brainless fools they are, they will follow that path. But what's ahead is nothing but hell. And so, the orcs moved out, and just like I had done during the day, I cut their limbs off. I killed the first orc, then I gave the other 2 to the goblins. The goblins wielded their wooden spears, and they pierced the orcs through their wounds. Like this I killed that entire orc group. Oh, speaking of which, one of the 3 orcs had its limbs eaten while it was still alive. That meat is quite valuable, so we took it along with the things in their home back to the village. Our spoils of war include armor, long axes, clubs, long swords, and others. These things are too small for the orcs to use, so they probably plundered these from the village here. We got quite a bit of spoils, so I guess it's not bad. In any case, with this we should at least not have to worry about having our food stolen for a while. So what's next is strengthening this group. It's true for me as well, but this race called Goblin is really too weak. I don't have any pieces except these goblins, so there's no other choice but to strengthen them or increase their number. For the meantime, I'll make it my goal to have 8 more goblin raiders. At the same time, I should also work on leveling up my class. At the very least, I'll need at least enough strength to cut these guys down if they ever think of rebelling against me. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep quietly. Level has increased from level 14 equals level 32. Author's note. Orcs are weak. That's not true at all. Please think of orcs, normal, as equal to a goblin noble when it comes to strength, with the rest being decided by their equipment, LV, and skill. Volume 1, Chapter 8. Intruder, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Level, 32, Class, Noble, King of a group, possessed skills, Divine Protection, Goddess of the Underworld, Altesia, Attributes, Darkness, Death. With the immediate threat gone, I began to formulate a plan on how to expand our area of living. Right now, the area around the abandoned building is able to provide more than enough food for us to live on. There's also a lake, so there's no shortage of water. BL.net. Moreover, there are no shortage of animals to be hunted. However, my dream isn't something that will end in a remote place like this. Even if I announce myself as king here, only around 50 goblins will submit to me. That's not enough. It's not enough at all. I don't even know where in this world I am. There are humans in this world, so there should be another existence that lives on this land who holds an authority separate from ours. Whether that existence be a dragon, a human, or perhaps something else altogether. The first thing is to understand the geography of the surrounding area. How far does this forest extend? Is there something outside the forest? And from where to where are the dangerous areas in the forest? In order to collect that information, and in order to make them understand that which is called an organization, I have to educate the goblins. And so I made the goblins work in a 3-man cell system that I created, and let them hunt that way. Every 3 male goblin worked as a group, hunting their prey with traps and tools. At the same time, I only permitted copulation with the female goblins to the 3-man cells that achieved excellent results. Perhaps it's because some of my humanity still remains that I fail to feel any sort of compassion towards the female goblins. Should I be happy about this? I call the area that the former estranged group lived in, the boundary when traveling by foot. It's an area that's relatively safe with plenty of traps having been prepared. Having left the command of the hunts to Jigu and Giga, I went to explore the still unexplored areas. When it comes to the untrodden areas of the forest, the first thing I should check is the vicinity of the lake. The distance from the village to the lake by foot is around half a day. For my equipment, all I had was a pelt armor we got from defeating the orcs, 2 long swords, and a dagger. It might be too light, but I have to increase the overall strength of the group, so it can't be helped if these are all I have. I have already thrown everything that seemed usable to the goblins, and I'm only exploring around the lake for my own sake, so it should be fine. Hiding in the bushes, I searched for any enemy. Right now I'm more than a match for an orc, but there might be creatures stronger than me in this forest. Like the giant spider, or an orc I've never seen before, or perhaps a lizard man. And then there are the kobolds. They're weaker than goblins, but they're quite troublesome if they work together. I haven't seen one yet though. But more than that, what's really bothering me is the fact that I don't trust the goblins. In other words, I'm always living in fear of their betrayal. After all, they're beasts. Even if they speak words like humans, and try to live like humans, they are not humans. That's why there are things that's impossible to make them comprehend. And so it's not strange at all for me to look for a place I can fit in inside that. In the height of hunting, I cornered a strong enemy and killed it. I later realized that I couldn't remember anything except that elated sensation. And just like when I'd hurt them, I felt anger rush to my head so much so that it felt like it was going to burst. That sensation was repulsive. I'm turning into a monster. I can feel it. I can see an illusion of my mind merging into my body. Without any clear line, it feels as if I'm being dragged into some sort of destiny. Grating, I bit my teeth. This isn't funny. I am going to become a king by my own will. I'm going to rule over the monsters. I'm going to rule over men. And, as those wandering thoughts spun in my mind, the first creature I'd seen in this forest passed by my eyes. Earth-colored rabbit covered in armor, an armor rabbit. I stared at it as it led 5 others as to eat grass. Now that I think about it, I am quite hungry. Suddenly recalling my hunger, I gradually shortened the distance between my prey and myself. Inch by inch, I crawled towards the armor rabbit. Then all of a sudden its ears braced, and it noticed me approaching. That it noticed. The instant I thought that, I sprinted. Rushing as fast as I could, I swung my sword as I barely caught up with it. But as if they had known that my sword would come, the armored rabbits ran in scattered directions. Settling for the still small rabbit, I resisted the urge to swing my blade down, and leaped once more. As the rabbit was about to run away, I threw a blow strong enough to hollow the ground. Its neck sent flying, the flowers of blood bloomed, and it lay lifeless on the ground. I took its lifeless body into my hand, and took a bite out of it from its armor. My teeth sunk into it, but it was unusually hard. At this rate my fangs might end up breaking instead, so I used my dagger to strip off its armor, and eat only the meat. Although it was small, it felt like it ended as soon as I put it into my mouth. And all that was left was a wearisome sensation. Sheathing my sword, I tried crunching the remaining small bones, but my teeth couldn't go through. I looked closely at the armor rabbit's armor. Looking at the splattered neck, it can be seen that only the part around the neck was the armor slightly thinner. Looks like my hunt success was only out of luck. If I had hit its armor, my sword may have been sent flying back instead. Fumo, I breathed out unconsciously. There's no need to brood any more on this. More than that, I wonder if it's possible to use this as armor. However, in order to do that, a specialist with knowledge in sewing, and the ability to mold this into a shape that'll protect the vitals is necessary. I tried cutting off the unnecessary parts with a short sword, but it's not really going well. This kind of delicate work is just really not suited for goblin hands. Looks like I'll need to get a human to make this. In the end, I decided to just take it back home since it might be useful later. I opened a hole in the pelt part of the armor, inserted a rope of ivy through it, fastened it, and carried it on my back. Alright, let's move on. Walking through the bushes, I surveyed the vicinity of the lake till sunset. My spoils for the day include 3 pelts of armor rabbits, and the fang and hide of a small alligator with wings called shape alligator. By the time I came back, there was a commotion in the village. I knitted my brows at the tumult, and called out. What's all the commotion about? King. The old goblin respectfully bowed to me, but it seemed to be in a state of excitement. It's humans. The humans have come into the forest. Surprisingly, it was actually quite a troubling issue. How many? What are their equipment? Giga stepped before me. 6 humans. 2 with axe, 2 with sword, 1 spear. Female, 2. It's too early. I knew that we'd eventually have to make contact with the humans, but this timing is. Moreover, I don't know what their objective is. Why did they come here? To subjugate us. No, it's not like we. At that moment, I remembered the kidnapped women. If that's their purpose, then it'd be impossible for them to be anything else but an enemy. It's possible that they could have come here to investigate. What to do? What to do? Should I do it? But even if I hold it off for now, they'll come back. What's most difficult is having to deal with the humans' relentless attack. I'm human, so I know. If the humans were to be driven by hate, by malice, or perhaps by fear, then their tenacity will shoot through the roof. Then should I run? Where? A place I could run to with all my subordinates. Is there such a place? Even if we were to go in the night, beasts that move during the night, like the giant spider, could attack us, causing needless casualties. What to do? What to do? King, your orders. I looked down on the serval, old goblin, and pondered. I could also just abandon these guys. Have the humans entered the forest before? The old goblin folded its arms as it curiously looked up to me. The humans find themselves lost in the forest several times in a year. Several times in a year. That's not too bad. It's been a month since I've been born into this world. If I could buy at least a month's time, then I should at least be able to grow bigger than I am now. We'll kill the humans. Jigu, prepare. Giga, keep watch while we're out. Taking 40 goblins with me, I ran into the forest. Under the twilight, we moved as fast as possible while making sure not to encounter the giant spiders and the giant skink lizards. Being able to perceive the location of the humans was thanks to my strengthened night vision, which was even stronger than the goblins. The humans roamed, walking, with a torch in their hand while they raised their voices. Confirming the humans' locations, I ordered the goblins to be quiet and to pick up some stones. Then I inclined my ears to listen to the humans. Finra, say something. Where are you? They seem to be looking for someone. The two men that wielded an axe had their backs bent, seemingly appearing to be unversed in the ways of fighting. Contrary to that, the man and woman who carried a sword with them exuded a dangerous aura. But what I can't comprehend are the two in the center. A man and woman who wore religious clothing. I fail to see any traces of strength in them, but my nose is telling me that these two are the most dangerous ones. You could also say that I'm just feeling uneasy. But those two are giving off a strange atmosphere. The man gives off an ominous aura, while the girl is giving off an overwhelming, divine aura. That's the kind of power I can see hidden inside those two. I wasn't enthusiastic at first, but now that the praise are here, my face can't help but twist into a smile. With my subordinates concealed, I appeared before the 6 humans, and stood at the center of that narrow animal trail. What's your business, human? In order to see their reaction, I asked them that while using at the same time. To that, the 2 men wielding an axe, and the female swordsman faltered. But the friar, the nun, and the male swordsman didn't appear to be affected at all. The enraged voice of my howled from the depths of my soul. Why is there a high-class goblin here? The male swordsman opened his eyes wide. And the 2 axe-wielding men began to gradually step down. To think it could even speak human language. It's fairly high. Ranked, be careful. Yelled the friar, as he stepped forward to cover the nun. I calmly probed their individual movements. If we can talk, then if we tried talking, as my ears picked up the whispering voice of the nun, the friar interfered. Impossible. That's a monster, you know. Seemingly having been pushed by everyone else's opinion, the nun was made to step back. As I glanced at her, I concluded that she isn't the main force of the group, rather, she's the weak point. Kiefan, can I leave it to you? Responding to the friar's words, the male swordsman stepped forward. The aura oozing out of the man was heavy. The man appeared to be an experienced swordsman. But he still appears to be in his 20s, or is he actually in his 30s? The man wielded a thick, massive, blade that needed 2 hands to carry. Don't hate me, this too is destiny. As I thought he was going to bring the massive, double-edged sword to his shoulder, the man shortened the distance of 10 steps to a 0 with fearful rush. Not good. Concluding that in an instant, I quickly moved back as I threw my dagger. That sword smashed against the place I was standing at without the tiniest bit of deviation, hollowing a huge hole in the ground. That hole was enough for a goblin to fully enter, causing me to be dumbstruck for a moment. This is the power of a human. The dagger I'd thrown has been broken into 2, scattered besides the swordsman. Planning to give chase, a faint light covered the swordsman's body, while the friar behind him formed spells as he whispered something. There's no point in arguing about it, huh? Then in that case, there's no choice but to fight as a monster to my heart's content. Man against beast, if it's that kind of setting, then I have a fighting style that's perfectly suited. Do it. I yelled with ordering my subordinates to throw the stones. Even if it's only a bunch of stones, having stones the size of a fist thrown at you from the thickets from both sides simultaneously is not something laughable. The stones came flying one after another. And some of them hit the 2 axe-wielding men, knocking them unconscious. Zion.sama, Reshia.sama. Not good. Even the friar's leg was injured. The female swordsman covered the nun as she screamed, while the male swordsman only temporarily lost his focus. However, I wouldn't miss that small opening that I'd been waiting for. I kicked myself off the ground with all my strength, sprinting at my fastest. Then I grabbed the swordsman's face that was twisted in fright, and swung my sword in a flash. I felt my sword sink into his flesh as that speedy sword came to a stop. And with his left leg sunken into the ground, half of his body turned over with it as the axis. At the same time I turned to face the swordsman, I swung my sword once more from the back, aiming at his neck. Ku, God blesseth us his protection, shield. At the friar's response that was too late, a wall expanded around them. This is probably that thing called magic. A semi-circle-shaped, colorless wall stood in the air, repelling the stones, causing the crushed stones' particles to spread around the wall. Then blood spurted from inside that membrane. The swordsman's body slowly fell into the ground. With the resounding screams as accompaniment, I wielded my sword high once more. The friar is in the way. Lily, take Reshia with you, and run. A ball of fire formed at the palm of the friar. Pour the grace of God to flame. Fireball. A lump of fire the size of a fist came flying in a straight line, aiming for my head. Bending over, I dodged it, and at the same I went down on my limbs like a beast, and rushed towards the friar. With a low sword stance, I attacked from that beast-like position. You, monster! The chipped blade scooped out the entrails of the friar, penetrating his back through his abdominal cavity. The friar spouted all manners of curses as blood came out of his mouth. But the friar continued to block my path, and I could see what could be called that of a religious fanatic's surface in his eyes. We art the disciples of God. Quiv are not will we ere death. The vanguards of the devil, unable to hold myself back at that vilification, I pierced the friar with my sword, and gouged out his entrails. The friar screamed as if his soul had just been withdrawn. Right before his God summons his soul, I decided to pay my respects. I brought my mouth close to him, and whispered by his ear with a voice loud enough only for him alone to hear. You know that tasty-looking girl? I'm going to kill her as I play with her. The friar opened his eyes in fright as he breathed his last breath. Which woman did he thought of, I wonder? I pulled the chipped blade sword out of the lifeless friar with all my strength. And with a swing, the clots of blood clinging to the sword were all brushed off. Those clots of blood came splattering towards the female swordsman's face who was covering the nun. Shaking, the female swordsman pointed her sword at me. When I saw that, I unconsciously twisted my face into a sadistic smile. Item. Acquired iron second, large steel sword, level, rose from 32. 43, skill, swordsmanship C has progressed to C+. Volume 1, Chapter 9. Zenobia's follower, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Race, Goblin, Level, 43, Class, Noble, King of a Group, Possessed Skills, Divine Protection, Goddess of the Underworld, Altesia, Attributes, Darkness, Death, Coup. Monster. The female swordsman's hair was red like lilies, flowing, as she hurled insults towards me one after another. Perhaps she's noticed it already. That there's no longer anything she can do. And with no other path left, she's resorted to attacking me mentally. Or then again, she might simply be trying to rid the anxiety of the person behind her. Come. The thicket swayed, and my subordinates came out group by group. They then gathered around the surviving humans, rose their voices as if to threaten, and began hitting the ground with their clubs. Watching that scene, the humans' blood left their faces, and they became pale in fear. Now, how should I play with these? As I thought that to myself, the nun the female swordsman was covering caught my attention. Light overflowed from the girl's hands, wrapping the unconscious axe-wielding man in light. As that light wrapped the man, the flowing blood stopped. Let solace be blessed to all, heal. At that moment, I was watching in fascination as I looked on from the side at the nun whose eyes were closed. It was as if all of man's greed had vanished in that instant. An inhuman elegance that mustn't be trampled. It was before my very eyes. Yet it felt as if I couldn't reach her even if I were to reach out my hands. A height that was beyond my reach. I want you. The stretching hand from that sea of longing grasped my entrails, jolting my entire being, and bringing me down to the ground. I was brought down to my knees, my head bowed, and my posture prostrated before her feet. If only. If I could only pluck that flower, then. Even if my dreams were to be. I strongly shut my eyes and shook my head to those resounding thoughts. Someone is interfering with my thoughts. It's making me nauseous. The screams of grief and lamentation lashed out against me, causing my brain felt like it could burst to flames at any moment. Longing for my beloved, that seemingly endless anguish of madness that is desire tightened itself around my neck, strangling me. Who are you? Filled with hatred, I stared at that unseen being. It was penetrating into my brain fluids. Into my soul even, directly assaulting my very being. I could not help but hold my head in pain as I unsheathed my sword. It was so intense that only repugnance could come out of my mouth. I continued to breathe out roughly while the tip of my sword trembled at my will and pain. I am Reshia Felzeal, servant of the goddess of healing, Zenobia. Her amethyst-like eyes seized me. The goddess of healing, Zenobia. It was that was causing something within me to scream. Grow a AAA. Hiya. The female swordsman came rushing at that opening. She held her sword high, and with a slash, she aimed for my lowered head. But, it's slow. I reflexively brought my sword up, crashing with her falling sword. My stronger sword went against the female swordsman's sword that was backed by centrifugal force, repelling it away. Having put too much power, my arms screamed in pain at the recoil, but I don't have time to bother with that right now. Continuing like that, the female swordsman fell to the ground without any time to fix her posture. But at that moment, instead of attacking, I faltered to my knees. I cut my own knees with my sword, and as blood flowed, I regained my consciousness. Kill. If I don't kill this woman now, the one who's going to be eaten is me. That thought, which could be said to be instinctual, flashed at the back of my head. Seething with bloodlust, what stood before my gaze was a holy woman revered by humans. Please, run, Reshia. Sama. That holy woman gently shook her head at the incapacitated female swordsman. For me to abandon you guys. Let solace be blessed to all, heal. In a twinkle, the female swordsman's wound was healed. Kook, what came out of my mouth was a low-toned sneer. Devoured. Me. I ended up laughing at my own thoughts. Shut up. Shut up. I'm going to become a king. Lowering my head to another is impossible. Be it a holy woman. Be it God himself. I bow to no one. Catch them. And absolutely do not hurt them. Blood rushing to my head, my pupils focused on the holy woman as I ordered my subordinates to catch them. Watch me. I'm going to surpass you. I refuse to accept you bastards that mess with my thoughts. Skill has leveled up to from now on. This skill will mitigate not only the pressure from monsters, but also from far higher races. Spiritual reliance on the goddess of the underworld has weakened. You are defending against the mental attacks of the goddess of the underworld. Because of the weakened mental attack from the goddess of the underworld, the urge towards the goddess of healing will be soothed. Skill will evolve. Acquired. Acquired. Skill, because you have acquired the skill, the loyalty of your subordinates will increase. The influence you receive from the gods will also decrease. Skill, because you have acquired the skill, in the instance where you name yourself and fight against an opponent with the same weapon, then you will receive physical strength 20% up, agility 20% up, and damage received will be reduced by 20%. Skill acquired. If your opponent's number is lesser than your subordinates, then you will be able to see their weak point regardless of level. Author's note. A heroine candidate finally makes an appearance. But the protagonist's not human. That's exactly why it's exciting. Volume 1, Chapter 10. The Victor and the Defeated. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Race, Goblin, Level, 43, Class, Noble, Horde Chief, Possessed Skills, Divine Protection, Goddess of the Underworld, Altesia, Attributes, Darkness, Death. After we repelled the humans who invaded the village, we went back to the village with the 4 humans, 2 female and 2 males, as prisoners. There, Giga and the old goblin welcomed us back home with a hint of terror in their eyes. It's only expected, after all. The village is an environment where it could diminish while the leader's away. Taking the opportunity to show off the difference in strength between me and the goblins, I took the iron second, large steel sword I stole from the human swordsman, and carried it over my shoulder. The king is strong, you can't win. By showing that to them, be it consciously or unconsciously, every day, then the chances of them rebelling will also dwindle. Then again, they are stupid, so they might eventually forget anyway. I had the prisoners imprisoned in one of the buildings, separating the males from the females. I made sure to confiscate anything that could be used as a weapon, as it wouldn't be any fun if they committed suicide. After all, these are the first humans I've made contact with since coming to this world. From the battle a while ago, communication seems to be possible. So with that in mind, I want as much information as possible. And above all else, the existence of magic. That woman, Recia Felzeal. I don't know about the god's genealogy, but I feel as if there's some sort of fate around her. If the chance presents itself, I'd like to ask if there's something between the goddess of the underworld and the goddess of healing. Amethyst-colored pupils, blue hair extending until her shoulder, and annoyingly, a perfect face so beautiful that it looks as if it was given to her by the god of beauty. In fact, even I, a monster, can't help but be charmed by her. Her small, damp lips draw my eyes to her. And those gentle, wide-opened eyes of hers with the benevolence of a goddess seem to be shaking in distress. Seeing that, desire jolted within my body, and I made a cruel smile. If this continues, I'll definitely fall to ruin. Amused, I watched on at that destructive rampage lying before my eyes that was very much like a car speeding towards a cliff. This so-called jail is really nothing more than a reinforced shed that was originally for animals. Throwing the 2 women into the jail, the edges of my mouth twisted, and a vicious smile could be seen as I spoke to them. Don't think of running away. At the very least, I don't plan on hurting you as long as you stay here. That female swordsman has her guard up as always, while I can't figure out what Reshia is thinking with that expressionless face of hers. If you run, I'll eat the men. And if you commit suicide, I'll do the same. The female swordsman didn't appear to have been affected by those words, but Reshia on the other hand, a strong gleam of will seemed to have been lit within her eyes as she looked at me. It's a thought for the gods. What you should do to survive, that is. Having only said those words, I left the place. The king, himself, will punish anyone who dares to lay his filthy hands on the spoils. I faced the gathered goblins in the village and declared that. And then, I distributed the food. After I assigned which goblins to take over guard duty for the night, I went to sleep. Zenobia, why? I can hear the sad voice of a woman. It was I who fell into Hades, and yet. Why are you the only one who receives father's affection? It was because of the love of their father, the ancestor god who birthed the earth, Ativ. That who shouldn't be loved was loved. And the grief of the woman could not cease wherever it went. Ah, if I could only take the place of that woman, then. That cursed voice looked up from the depths of the darkness and strangled my neck. This is why gods are sheet. Pushing something unneeded onto me. Rather than a god, aren't you closer to a demon? I stretched my back once, and shook off the dregs of that nightmare. If I could only take the place of that woman. The traces of that nightmare inside my head were like thick soil sucking me in. Well done. Looks like you didn't run away. That was the first thing I mentioned when I got to the jail where Reshia and the female swordsman were. I did consider them running away, but if it's like this, then getting them to spit out information might be easier than expected. Without speaking another word, I smiled viciously at them and left. First things food. The 3-man cell still hasn't shown any results. I guess it can't be helped. Suddenly making the goblins work as a 3-man cell, of course it'll be quite difficult. There are some groups that aren't doing too bad though. As long as they find an impetus, they should be able to get some results, but. Well, until then, I'll have to do my best. It's also a good opportunity to try out that iron second, large steel sword, that I got yesterday. So with that in mind, I headed towards the lake with Giga and the first 3 goblins to take a walk. Part of my goal was to hunt the preys that come to drink water. King, there's a herd of Iral deer, spear deer. What passed before our eyes was a herd of spear deer. The spear deer have large horns that re-sharp at the tip. If you get hit by those, you'll probably die. As for its body, it's covered with hard fur all over. From the looks of things, their leader appears to be quite good as the bucks are all together, keeping the does and fawn protected. In a 1 versus 1 situation, the spear deer are above the goblins. They could be on par with the goblin rare, Giga, or perhaps even stronger. But what's more is that they're moving shrewdly with a leader guiding them. I made the goblins ready their throwing stones, while I, alone, went to close into the herd. I ordered Giga to pay attention to the surroundings, and slowly, we, along with the stone-throwing goblins, surrounded the herd. When we finally got close enough, the herd were already aware of us. But even then, they continued to drink water at their leisure. Looks like they're quite confident that they can run away. Certainly, that decision isn't wrong, if I were a wild animal that is. Garurua. Bellowing out the overpowering howl, I quickly rose up from the ground, and carried the large steel sword on my shoulder. Without stopping, I rushed at the herd of spear deer. And in response, the herd ran the opposite direction I appeared. But over there is where the stone-throwing goblins are waiting. The herd of deer immediately turned, but unfortunately for them, that was more than enough time for me. As I overtook the last amongst the herd, I swung my large steel sword down, aiming at the neck of a spear deer. It was still a fawn as its horn was still small and thin. I felt my sword weigh down on its meat, crushing even its bones. Having felled one, I quickly moved on to my next prey and ran. What entered my field of vision next was a fully grown buck. In order to protect the herd that had turned back, the buck headed towards me. I brought my sword high and swung it down against the buck. But a hard sound resounded as the deer's horns managed to stop my sword. It wielded its two large horns like a trident, and struggled to keep me from getting close. But I calmly dodged that, and instantly closed the distance between me and the deer that jumped back. Having completely entered my range, the deer's leg was crushed by my large sword, making it unable to move. I then finished it off, ending its suffering. I had my subordinates carry the two deer as we went back to the village. By the time we got there, it was almost noon. I inserted my dagger through the deer's wound, and skinned it off. This pelt could probably be turned into some clothes. I gave the liver to the larvae goblins, while I took the intestines for myself first. Afterwards, the rest of the goblins began to eat voraciously. Aside from the deer, we also had 3 triple boars, some rabbits, and some leaves for our breakfast. Amongst those, I took the rabbit, quickly skinned it, and removed its organs. After that I grilled it with fire and dry wood, and then I took it with me to the jail. Eat. The female swordsman was suspicious, while Reshia was emotionless and on guard as always. I didn't really expect them to let their guard down with just something like this. I left the rabbit meat covered in blood in front of the jail, while I went to prepare another one which I brought to the 2 men. These ones looked at me with fear instead, and ate it as soon as I gave it to them. Humph. Being scared witless, these 2 are still some ways off. Leaving those 2, I went back to where the 2 female were. Why are you giving us food? This is a deal. If you don't mind, that is. Reshia's stomach continued to cry out in hunger, but even then, she refused to touch the meal in front of her and only stared at me. I responded with an evil smile. I will use you and your friends. In that time, I won't kill you, and I also won't harm you. In other words, we get to live as long as we're useful. Lowly monster. What are you scheming? The corners of my mouth twisted upwards at the female swordsman's abuse. And who was it that was done in by this, lowly monsters? Even though the reason that you've fallen in a place like this is because of your ability, the female swordsman turned beet red in anger at that low tone sneering. She tried to say something, but Reshia stopped her. Lily.San, Reshia shook her head, stopping the female swordsman, and Reshia stared at me again. What is it that glitters in those amethyst eyes of hers, I wonder? Is it wisdom? Or is it an indomitable will to fight? Well, whatever it is, I'll be enjoying myself. This woman must become a stepping stone for me. And what is it that you want us to do? Give birth. In an instant, Reshia stiffened. That response was more than enough to make me smile wryly as the corners of my mouth twisted up. I jest. As Reshia was relieved from the bottom of her heart, the female swordsman exploded in anger. You bastard. I want you to take care of the healing. And at the same time, I want you to sew some things for me. Interrupting the female swordsman's fit, I said that. But I'm an adventurer. The female swordsman, Lily, was beet red in anger. And as if provoking her, I responded. And this adventurer of yours can't sew. Lily.San, tch. I got it. Also, when I feel like it, I want you to answer my questions. Is that all? Yes, that's all. Reshia looked at me dubiously. What? That gaze carried with it a hint of displeasure. And without showing any fear, Reshia asked me a question. I have 3 questions. 1. What happened to Chinos and Mattis? And would you happen to know a woman named Finra? I gave those men the same work and food I gave you. If they're useful, I'll let them live. If not, then they have no right to live. As for the women this swarm had kidnapped, they're all already dead. As for whether that's Finra or not, I wouldn't know. Lily became more and more hostile at my response, but in contrast, Reshia was like a student seeking an answer as she absorbed the answers I gave her. Please tell me your name. I don't have a name. If you want to call me something, then call me King. I see. Reshia didn't seem to be disappointed at all as she mumbled that. Having answered her questions, I left. It might be because of skill that I didn't feel the same urge I felt yesterday. Well, it's good even if I was only able to confirm that. You have leveled up. 43. 45.